Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast. Jeremy Werner, Joey Wagner here, and I know Illinois basketball played a game in Spain that they won by 45, but that's not going to be the focus of this podcast. We will get Derek Piper or Michael Toole to discuss the big win for Illinois over a team that wasn't very good. Joey, you are pounding on that computer, my man.
I'm not typing, man.
You're clicking that mouse.
Am I? Oh, I am.
Feverish.
I got a lot. You're right. I definitely do that.
I hate to call you out, but the people are hearing it.
I need called out. So I've got my. It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
We will talk about the game real quick, but in this podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've learned through the first week of Illinois football training camp. We'll hit on realignment as well. But you and I were like peeking at this Illinois basketball game against Valencia. In all respects to Valencia, it did not look like a team capable of competing with a Big Ten team like Illinois, Joey. But Illinois, we saw moments of it as we were between interviews and practice availability and practice viewing. The one thing I was watching as we were sitting there in Smith Center was Terrence Shannon's really good. 25 points on 10 of 14 shooting, a lot of those dunks, a lot of those at the rim. He had 25 points in 15 minutes. When he was on the court, when Coleman Hawkins was on the court, who had 7 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists for Coleman, Illinois just blew this team out. So to have those two as givens, to have them have good games, after Brad called Terrence what do you call him?
No, it was not flattering.
No.
In a very Brad Underwood way. I don't deal with fish.
You don't deal with birds. You don't deal with fish. But he called him. Usually, he's a barracuda, right? And the meme, which I'm sure Brad Underwood made himself. I'm sure he's got a meme generator somewhere.
That's what he was doing when Jeff was coaching. He was over there getting meme game going.
That's right. He probably was. But yeah, what a game by Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins. That certainly stands out. But 6 of 28 from 3, not so good. Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn chucking it up there today. Had a great windmill dunk. Saw him early on get to the rim, which is something Illinois needs more guys who can do, which is get to the rim off the bounce. But 1 of 8 from 3. Sincere Harris, 0 of 3 from 3. And 15 of 27 from the free throw line. Not so good. So the shooting not going so well in Spain. But any thoughts, Joey?
No, I mean, Derek Piper and I talked before Illinois played their first game and kind of said, what are you looking for? And one of the things beyond the shooting, which has not delivered at all in the first 2 games, that remains a concern. It was a concern when they got on the plane to go to Spain was, let's see Terrence Shannon be the best player on the floor, because that's how he should carry himself in every game that Illinois plays in. I know there's going to be some games he's not the best player on the floor, but that's how he needs to carry himself as a potential NBA guy. And I think he delivered that today, Jeremy. I think you saw that kind of that takeover after a not very, I don't even know that good. We didn't see the darn thing. Just the stat sheet wasn't really overwhelming for him. It's kind of underwhelming in his first game. He bounced back and he played like the Terrence Shannon we thought. Same concerns. Like, I feel like I haven't learned much because the concerns I had, shooting, who's your point guard, I think those probably still exist now after 2 games in Spain.
The good thing is you only had 11 turnovers in this game, and Valencia must have had 30 turnovers in this game. Illinois 19 steals in this game. So on the good side, we are getting a bigger sample size because we saw practice last week. We saw a box score from the previous game, and now we have this game that we've actually seen, right? Illinois, we got concerns about shooting, both three-point shooting and the free throws, and getting people good looks. That is a concern, is having somebody who can distribute. And, Ty Rodgers today, 3 assists to 1 turnover. That's better. I saw the 1 turnover. So I was like, ooh, how's this thing going so far? But to get these reps is going to be good for him. Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, 12 points on 15 shots today, 2 turnovers, 0 assists. So point guard remains a concern. 3-point shooting remains a concern. Shannon made 2 of 4. Goody 1 of 3. Moretti hit 1. Coleman Hawkins 1 of 2. But I don't expect Gibbs-Lawhorn and Sincere Harris to combine for 11 3-point attempts. They only made 1 of them today. So, hey, get your reps up, especially in a blowout win like this. But those remain concerns for this team. Where I think this team's going to be really strong, Joey, is defensively and on the glass. Now, this team, they played today, just did not have a front court, right? But Illinois had 64 rebounds, 25 offensive rebounds. Hansberry, who had 13 and 9 today, got extended run. He had 9 boards. Hawkins had 9 boards. Gary Ayre has had 8 boards. He's been really strong in the glass. Luke Goody's been good there. Justin Harmon had 6 boards. Sincere Harris had 7 boards today. So this team's long, athletic, physical, and we saw a bunch of dunks and oops today. Like, those are the things this team's really good at. It's the skill part. It's the creating shots and hitting shots that this team still has to prove it can do.
Yeah, Gary Ayre is somebody that I think you and I and Derek kind of circled in practice. Like, man, this guy is just old, smart guy, physical, tough. All those things kind of showed up. I'm going to level with you. You and I, like you mentioned, we didn't get a chance to sit down and watch this thing start to finish today. But what we saw was exactly that. And a guy who's smart rebounder, tenacious rebounder. I didn't get the offense going in the portions that we saw, but it's what I thought. I think he's a guy who fits well. I think Brad Underwood, as we know, prioritized him multiple times, both out of high school and out of the portal. So I think he's a really big cog in that defensively rebounding. But yeah, man, I think that's going to be a strength, and that kind of ties into us thinking the front court is going to be a position of strength for Illinois. I think I don't think it's coincidental that those two things go together.
Yeah, the thing about Gary Ayre is he could play the 3, right? Like, he can guard 3s, in my opinion, but he can play the 4. He's more of a post guy, I think, and that can shoot a little bit. But that allows Goody to play the 3, and Goody's really strong on the glass. Ty Rodder's in your backcourt. Like, we got questions about Ty maybe offensively, but we do know he's a really strong rebounder and a really good defender, and they caused havoc on that side of the court. One more note, Marcus Domask held out this game. That's not a surprise after we heard from Brad Underwood last week that he had a hamstring injury, so I wouldn't expect him to play in the final game either. So they got one more game on this trip coming up later this week. And we will get Derek Piper probably on this podcast in the next 24 hours or so to break down what he saw, because he did see it more in depth. This episode of the Illini Inquirer podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes in life, we're faced with tough choices, and the path isn't always clear. This can be with some major life changes, guys, whether it's going away to college, hitting the real world on your own. I know that's difficult. Relationships with significant others, or struggling as a parent. You always need someone to talk to. And whether you're dealing with decisions around your career, relationships, or anything else, therapy helps you stay connected to what you really want while you navigate this life thing, so you can move forward with confidence and excitement. Trusting yourself to make decisions that align with your values is like anything. The more you practice it, the easier it gets. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, if you've kind of been wavering about it, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is just fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and if you don't mesh with that therapist, you can find another one for no additional charge with BetterHelp. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Illini today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Illini. Joey, the Big Ten has 18 teams next year. Oregon and Washington heading to the Big Ten. What was your reaction?
Less surprised than UCLA and USC, because it felt like that was going. Like, it felt like the Pac-12 was really, really wobbling before those two left, and USC and UCLA was like, oh my God, what? But still kind of surprised because it's happening so quickly. There's a lot of financials that have still got to be worked out with those two programs coming into the Big Ten. And then I just kind of weird. Is that okay? Like, I'm kind of weird about it because the Pac-12 is not on very stable footing.
To say the least.
To say the least. It's weird, man. It's weird. Everything that we thought about the next two schedules after the 23 season football-wise, they're gone. You still have to figure out how this is going to work for basketball. I mean, you're talking basketball, every other sport. You're talking so many more trips west.
Can you imagine being that guy or group of people or that gal in that office? You spent a year and a half figuring out this great schedule. Not Illinois, but the Big Ten have put together this great flex schedule that
we don't even know if that still exists. Like the protected rivalry thing, we have no earthly idea if that's still a thing.
No idea if that's still going to be a thing. But can you imagine yeah, we need you to like probably going off on a great vacation, a deserved month-long vacation. We need you to come back into the office, okay? Like, and it's like, what? We got to do this all over again. But yeah, because they're coming here in 2024. I thought it'd be like 26, but the Pac-12 obviously needs a media deal here soon, and might not even be a conference after this year. Listen, I understand why it's happening. I don't know if I don't like, I'm not sitting here going like, oh, I can't believe this is happening to college football. What we knew for college football. Listen, college football has been doing this for decades, but it's all happening. Like all these changes at once, Joey, the transfer portal, NIL, it's all so much to take in. But the Southwest Conference was a thing. It was a pretty big thing. The Big 12 has only been around for 30 years, something like that. Penn State moving into the conference, Rutgers and Maryland. So stuff has always happened. But to happen like it is, and for a conference like the Pac-12 to potentially dissolve, it's a lot. And then to think that a conference has 18 teams, I don't like it in the short term because I just don't know how it's going to look, how it's going to work. Like, how does this? Are we doing divisions? Are we doing pods or all those things? But then I sit there and think, does it matter? Because ultimately, we're in this messy middle ground, Joey, where we're getting to 20 or 24 team super conferences, right? And what does that look like? Is that fun? Because that could be fun. Like it could be fun if you looked like the NFL with divisions, like your team and my team competing in the NFC North for division championships. Only one of them seems to win them. But like that is fun that you play for the division, you get into the playoff, and then you have a conference that you kind of whittle into and you play the other conference. Like that could end up being fun if like Illinois is playing for the conference title is more the division title. I don't know what that division title is, but maybe it's with Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Purdue, and Northwestern, right? And then you have another Eastern Conference, and you have a West Conference, whatever it is, West Division, I should say. And then you play the Big Ten has a playoff, and then the SEC has a playoff, and those two teams meet. Like that could end up being fun, but there's a lot of teams on the outside looking in of all of that. There's a lot of messiness that's going to be involved in whatever the next 10 years looks like. And for the meantime, it's just, I don't know if it's good for the sport. I don't know if it's good for, it could be good for football. I don't think it's going to be good for all these other sports. And it's messy right now. And I don't know where we're going. And I even asked Brett Bielema that question, where are we going with all this? And he doesn't know. So I'd love to ask Josh Whitman that. I'd love to ask Robert Jones, the president of Illinois, or the chancellor of Illinois, because he's the head of the chancellors and presidents council here. So it's just kind of like, where are we going? We're kind of in the middle. We're in the middle of all of this change.
Yeah, and in the process of that, you're losing a lot of like neighborly rivalries that mean a lot to a lot of people. Illinois and Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin don't play annually now, as it stands now. Dude, who knows what that's going to look like in December whenever this thing gets
Oregon
sorted.
as often as you play Iowa, that'll be weird.
It's very weird. So you're sacrificing that for money, which, I mean, I guess if you're going to sacrifice it for anything, may as well be money. Look, the other part I kind of wrestle with is new rivalries can still be born out of this, right? Like is it going to be with the same intensity that like Illinois basketball and Iowa basketball? Probably not. Like good games, equally matched teams produce rivalries.
There will be more good games. That is for sure.
Absolutely. And some rivalries will be born out of that, right? It'll take time, and it's going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to be as fierce as the ones we've come to know. But they'll be born. But you're sacrificing like Oregon State, Washington State. That's not a thing, but they're going to play Penn State, Rutgers. It's just Illinois. Like that just feels weird to me. Like you kind of traded in like asking people who have invested decades and a good deal of money into these programs to say, well, it's going to be a little harder to see your team because half the time you're going to be so far away. It's not drivable. It's not accessible, at least within the realm of a lot of financial hope. And that's what kind of stinks a little bit, is to watch those things slowly go away.
Maybe the best way to do this is like, who are the winners and losers of this? The winners are the TV networks.
And everybody getting a check from them.
Or the streaming. Yeah. I mean, Brett Bielema came out and said, hey, I support this, whatever. I would if I were Brett Bielema. You're going to make more money because of this. Like the expansion, this new media deal, it's the reason he's getting $6 to $7 million a year, right? Like, So yeah, all these, I think the schools, the athletic departments, this is a win for them in the revenue side of things, the TV networks. That certainly is. And I think for football and basketball players, it's gonna be a huge win. Because this is only going to help you in your case for more pay. Other winners of this, obviously the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big 12 has been a big winner in this, and being able to poach off these Pac-12 schools remains to be seen with the ACC. But anyone who's making money, I think, is the benefit. The losers of this, would you say the other student athletes? Like,
yeah, and the people spending money.
Explain that.
The fans spending money, like it's not going to be as accessible to go. If you're an Illinois fan, and let's say every other year you drove to Iowa, to Wisconsin, to Minnesota, that was your thing, right? Or if you're a Minnesota fan, Iowa's got 150 rivalries, it sounds like. Yeah. So if you're an Iowa fan, like you go to these, is it feasible for you to get in the car and go to UCLA, to USC, to Arizona, to Washington? And to be fair, it's probably not very feasible to go to Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, along those lines. Or imagine, we're talking like the Midwest that are kind of in the middle. What if you're a Penn State fan and 4 of your 12 games are on the other side of the country? Like, it's just the people spending money are probably on the outside, like, what is going on here? Which is, I do want to bring this up really quickly because I wonder what you think. This is just a lot of money. And like, you hear the numbers and you're like, dang, that's a lot. We can't comprehend how much that is because we don't have that. And it's not coming into our pocket. I do think, and no athletic director is going to do this, no chancellor or president is going to do this. But if there was a little more clarity on where some of this money coming in from the TV network was earmarked to go to, like, would people feel better about that? Like, okay, well, my team is going to play on the other side of the country, but because of this deal, we're getting X, Y, or Z. Like, would that be easier to stomach if you're a fan? I don't know. I think so.
It goes straight back into your product, right? Like, it's going into your facilities. It's going into your coaches, most importantly, probably. It's your personnel. It's going into your personnel. You get Brett Bielema, you pay him $6-7 million, and then in 5 years, he's going to get paid $10 million.
I mean, I understand that. And I'm not disagreeing with that. But like, you had Brett Bielema before this Pac-12 stuff happened, right? So like,
now he becomes even more valuable. Like,
I get it. I just think it's harder to comprehend when you just like, it's like,
it's the same
with
reason.
Everything. It's with everything.
Same reason Jaylen Brown's going to make $70 million, because in the new NBA and how much money they make, you have to put that back into the product. And he makes 35% of the cap. So that's what's going to happen. So I don't know if it's like, oh, you're going to get this thing. It's just, you are going to be part of the club. And that's the losers of this. The biggest losers of all of this are Oregon State, Washington State, potentially Cal. We'll see what happens with Stanford here. But if I'm sitting there and I'm Wake Forest, or some of these other schools in the ACC that aren't known, Boston College, really, I mean, I know they got a little bit of history there, but if you're those schools in the ACC that the SEC is not going to want, you're going to be on the outside looking in. And I don't know if in 10 years, do these TV networks push the Big Ten or the SEC to consolidate further? Because what do they want? They want Ohio State, USC. They want Oregon against Michigan, right? Like that. Those are the matchups they want. Do they want Northwestern, Purdue? Right? Like, I mean, it's still a Big Ten game, but those aren't the games they're wanting. They're wanting these huge rivalries, and that's why Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC is going to make sense. And then you go steal Miami or Clemson. Those are big brands that you want. Maybe North Carolina is involved in that. So I don't know what that looks like in 10 years of where those schools go. Like, does the Big 12 just decide to become the basketball conference and picks up some of those ACC teams that get left out, like Duke or something like that? I don't know. And you could have Duke, North Carolina rivalry gone in basketball. So yeah, I mean, the losers are the traditional rivalries, because that's what makes a lot of these things fun. But man, it's been going away for a while. The ACC and, the Big East basically changing completely over the last 2 decades. That's been happening here for a while. Oklahoma State obviously is not going to happen. So yeah, man, like those are definitely some of the losers in this. I don't know where I'm at with the fans yet, because I do think in 10 years this could be a lot of fun for fans, but the way they've consumed college football or college basketball or whatever it is for the last 20, 30 years, it's definitely different. And for some people, I know it's probably not any good. It's not better.
Yeah, I mean, it's not better if you're an Oregon fan or a Washington fan or a Rutgers fan or a Penn State fan. Like let's say you live in New Jersey, your team plays a 7 p.m. local tip on a Tuesday night at Oregon. That's 10 p.m. for you. Like the way you consume the game has changed in the sense that you might not.
Yeah.
At least live. I'm in the same would go for the other way where if you're in Oregon or Washington, you might be finishing up your last hour at work.
And you might not be good in your new conference.
Might not be good.
Think about Nebraska there for a moment, right? I mean, I don't know if Texas and Oklahoma are going to be nearly as good in their new conference. Like that's the one thing if you're an Oregon State fan and you go to like, listen, you're on the outside looking in, you're not going to make nearly as much money. But if you do end up, say, like in the Mountain West, you might be competing for conference titles, something that doesn't happen all that often in the Pac-12. So the games might be more fun, but you're not playing for the same stakes that you were previously, even if you weren't a very good program. And I know Oregon State's playing well recently.
Yeah, but your recruiting might change if you don't have a conference to sell to a kid on the recruiting trail. So it's just, yeah, man, like I don't know that I love it. I understand the financial ramifications of it. I get it. I think there's a lot of domino effects that are just kind of like, well, that kind of sucks if that ultimately is a thing. If some of these rivalries truly fall away, or you've basketball, you can get into. Is 20-game Big Ten schedule still viable? Like what? There's so many different domino questions. It's like just when you started to get used to things, like it's probably it's potentially going to fall by the wayside. So it's weird, man. It's different.
You know who else is a loser in this? The NCAA, because I don't think the SEC and Big Ten are going to be part of the NCAA within 10, 12 years. We'll see if that's a hot take, but feels like it's trending that way, Joey.
It does. Like, and it might feel more like it trends that way when this ACC, because the ACC is like the next domino out there, right? Like there's all smaller dominoes, but the next big wave, I think, probably has to do with the ACC. When that is, we'll see. But that could probably, if you're the NCAA, you might be circling the date that you think that could happen. Like, oh boy.
You're basically looking at the Big Ten as the Western Conference and the SEC as the Eastern Conference. You know what I mean? Like that's what it would end. That's where I think we're heading. And where the Big 12 is in that, I don't know. Where if there's a remaining ACC, I don't know. Like maybe the Big 12 is just the basketball conference. I don't know what it's all going to look like. Or does Big 12 have a seat at the table? I don't know.
Big 12 rebounded pretty well,
given
where it stood a few years ago. Good for the Big 12 for kind of putting it together quickly, because it didn't look very promising for them.
All right, Joey, let's talk about Illinois football. And how we're going to do this is we have had very little access to actually seeing practice. What we have been able to see is a lot of good stretching, a lot of pliability out there, Joey.
Special teams.
A lot of good special teams that we've seen, like watching Andy Boo take these guys through being runners, gunners, all those different things, blockers. It's been fun to watch, but very little individual drills. But we have met with a lot of the assistants. We have met with a lot of the players and of course, Brett Bielema and the coordinators as well. So we've had about a week of training camp practices. We're 5 practices in, I believe. Six practices in as we record this on August 9th. So let's just go back and forth here. And we're going to talk about what we've learned from Illini training camp so far. So a thing that stuck out, I'll let you go first, Joey, is just whatever comes to mind, what you think has been interesting so far that you've learned.
I mean, I think we've got to start with Matthew Bailey.
That was number one.
Yeah, I mean, you and I project him as a starter. I don't think that's unfair to do. I think it's very reasonable to think that. And he has been out as he continues to deal with the same injury that held him out in the spring and apparently impacted him in the summer. If it's still impacting him, we've seen him in a walking boot. We've seen him on a kind of a scooter. And today we saw him on crutches. Brett Bielema has said he remains hopeful that Matthew Bailey will return to practice a few weeks. It sounds like before the Toledo game, which kind of getting closer to that here. But if you see a guy in a boot with the season less than a month away, it's probably fair to wonder. But they need Matthew Bailey, man.
Yeah, so Matthew Bailey broke his foot in the offseason, dropped a weight on his foot, broke the foot, sat out most of spring ball or all of spring ball. And then, during the summer, I think he was healing. They were watching that process. And Brett Bielema said the other day there was a setback. We don't know what that setback was. But the first day we get to training camp, we see him with a walking boot on and rolling around in one of those scooters where you don't put any pressure on your foot. And then today we see him on crutches. Now, maybe this is just to protect him from himself so he doesn't push it. So that would be the optimistic view. But when I'm 4 weeks out from the season opener and I see Matthew Bailey on crutches and wheeling around, and I saw him, limp around a little bit, like I'd question whether he'll be ready for the opener, which means adding those transfer safeties and Clayton Bush, who's a free safety, Demetrius Hill. I'll ask Aaron Henry. He's been thought of as a free safety, but if Bailey happens to be out, I think he could potentially come up in the box. But Nicario Harper, who sat out practice today, didn't look like anything serious. He's an important piece at strong safety, but depth might be really important here. And two of the main guys that are depth right now at safety are, walk-ons guys. Solo Turner potentially is a strong safety, could be the third string guy. If Bailey's not playing, he steps up in the depth chart. And then Miles Scott's gotten some buzz since the spring, since he moved from wide receiver to safety. Now he's more of a free safety type. So I think he would give depth there, but yeah, safety depth gets interesting there. And Brett Bielema told you the other day, like they think some of those guys can be interchangeable at times at safety based on what they do. But Matthew Bailey projected to be a strong safety. So Nicario Harper is going to be really important there and potentially depth beyond him.
Yeah, absolutely. And at a position where you're replacing 4 or 5 starters in your defensive secondary, all three. I don't know if we should still call nickel a safety because the nickels we've seen practicing with Antonio Finellis and the cornerbacks. But the point being, 3 guys they considered safety positions last year, and then obviously Devin Witherspoon. So, yeah, they added depth in the offseason a lot, kind of pretty steadily, right? First it was Nicario Harper, then it was Demetrius Hill. I think that order's right. And then Clayton Bush.
And don't you perk up and think maybe Clayton Bush was in part. I think Demetrius Hill, he told me he played strong safety last year. So I do think he's a guy that could play that role. And Clayton Bush, they've talked about is explicitly a free safety. Maybe
the dime package, we think.
Yeah, and could play in the dime package as well. But they talked about him as a center fielder. I wonder if they had a Clayton Bush to be like, all right, maybe if we have to move Hill up in the box as a strong safety, we could do that. Because, we've seen Demetrius Hill. He looks very capable of playing in the box, how big he is.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable point. I don't know that there's a bigger question I have when we meet with Brett Bielema. And for the next few times we do, then, hey, how's Matthew Bailey? Because you're talking a projected starter in a heavy turnover, a position of heavy turnover.
Yep.
And a guy who looked really good. It isn't like, oh, he's just not just a projected starter. There's no such thing, but a guy who looked good as a freshman, who shows a lot of long-term ability.
So one of the biggest questions we had was secondary. So to have one of your main pieces that you thought was a given, to have him, still injured, still recovering from injury, 4 weeks out is a concern. My first one, Joey, is going to be Josh Kreutz is your starting center. There's no question. I think we had a feeling that would be the case, but they've talked about it. Basically, Josh Kreutz is our guy, which obviously they were trying to get an upgrade or get some competition, and they added competition with Will Lease at that center position. But you talked with Bart Miller today. I heard a little bit from Bart Miller today, and they rave about his intelligence, his IQ, his ability to communicate at the line of scrimmage. Of course, he's just not played besides the barge formation. He hasn't really played on the offensive line. So they're entrusting him to a big position. I think they're really eager to see how he does, given we'll mention it over and over again, just like we did Doug Kramer. He's undersized, but can he overcome those things?
Yeah, I think there were times last season that he gave them confidence in practice that should something happen to Alex Pihlstrom, they would have had a degree of comfort with him going out there. But the point remains, is they tried pretty hard this offseason to add not just depth. We've seen Brett Bielema address depth mostly short of quarterback in the transfer portal. They were kind of starter hunting here at center with Avery Jones and who was the JUCO?
Mari Wiggins was the JUCO, yeah.
Arkansas, is that right for
Yeah,
him?
I think he's a backup at Arkansas.
Yeah. So and now it's like Krutz is the guy, and I've said this before on here, and I'll say it again. I got the vibe in talking to people through the offseason that the guy, bring it on.
Yeah.
Competition's fine. Bring it on. I'm not worried. He's confident in himself. He's confident in his skills. And it seems like, I know you talked with Isaiah Adams earlier this week. Seems like they're pretty confident in him and kind of follow that confidence and that. I mean, he kind of puffs his chest out a little bit. He's not arrogant, but like he believes in himself. He should. He's a good football player.
I don't want to mention Olin every time we mention Josh. I feel bad about it, but everyone knows who Olin is, and he's feisty as hell. That's what they say. That's what they say about Josh. And I've seen it. I've seen him do that in practice and when he was a high school player. He's feisty as heck. So both Julian Pearl and Isaiah Adams both mentioned that. So yeah, he seems to have earned a lot of confidence over the last 8-9 months. And I think there's no question he is the guy at center. What do you got, Joey?
Let's just stay on the offensive line, should we? I think Zy Chrysler is the right tackle.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's the front runner there. We wondered, we had heard later in the summer that was probably an option. Remember, we didn't see him in the spring, which, to be fair, we probably would have seen him at right tackle had he been healthy in the spring. Sounds like he's lost some weight. He's reshaped his body more than 20 pounds, which is notable because, I mean, he's a large guy. Obviously, you've got to be on the offensive line. But when you're coming off surgery, you wonder what that looks like. And he kept himself in really good shape and enough that he can go out there.
He needed to be rotated in for last year because of that. Jordan Slaughter played a 6-man role and was valuable, but they had to do that with Zy Chrysler to keep him fresh too.
That's right. So that would mean, like, no one said Zy Chrysler is the right tackle going to Toledo, but I think we are smart enough to be able to piece that together, which means right guard is open, Jeremy. And I think that's primarily Jordan Slaughter and Josh Geske trying to battle that out in a very similar way that Jordan Slaughter's try to fight for a starting spot for, a few years now. So it sounds like what we thought out of spring, right? We saw Geske at right tackle, and we assumed Chrysler would just slide back in at right guard. That is flipped with Jordan Slaughter in the mix, trying to get some snaps there as well and trying to win that starting job.
Yeah, sorry to ask you this on the air, but what did Bart Miller talk about Josh Geske today, and what did he say? Because I'm wondering if it lines up with Adams and Pearl talking about.
He did. I've got two questions. Bart Miller for this. We like this about Bart Miller. Very long-winded, very detailed answer. It does take a minute to transcribe, but a lot of what Brett Bielema said, a guy who has really reworked his body, who's put a lot in, who's worked his butt off since this coaching staff, which didn't recruit him. I think it's fair to, like they didn't, they kept him on. He works really hard, and he's a guy who worked himself into this position. And Bart Miller said something along the lines of, it probably happened faster than maybe I thought it would.
Yeah,
with him when they first got here, and like that's a pretty good, or pretty high praise for Josh Geske.
I wrote the story when he was a recruit, but he's a type 1 diabetic. So to put weight on him was a big question. Like how do they do it? Do they do it well? And he's done an unbelievable job of that. And I think it was either Isaiah Adams or Julian Pearl just raved about him in the weight room, about how he's done that. So the strength stands out. And the other thing that stands out, because when we hear Bart Miller talk about physicality, that's a great chance to get on the field, because he would rather get physical than have the perfect technique. He goes, as long as you are the more physical guy, you have a chance. Like that matters more to Bart Miller, which is a change from the previous staff, to be honest with you. Like it's about mindset. And from the way that his fellow offensive linemen talk about him, Josh Geske is a very physical player. So I think he's got a real chance to win that job, even over a veteran and Jordan Slaughter, who he knows a solid, serviceable player when he's in there. But it does sound like, and the other part about Geske, he can play tackle too. So I don't know if they want him to play tackle, but he potentially gives him the versatility that if something happens at right tackle, that maybe he could play that too.
Yeah, I think it's a 2-man race for that right guard job. And just to be clear on everything else, the left side hasn't changed, not going to change. I don't know that it ever was going to change. No. They like Julian Pearl at left tackle. They love Julian Pearl at left tackle. Love Isaiah Adams at left guard. Feel very, very strongly about what that left side can be. And now you're starting to see They've not said it. I think you're starting to get the vibe that the right side is shaping up. And as you mentioned, Kurtz at center.
All right, Joey. My next one, the quarterback competition is intriguing. The backup quarterback competition is intriguing.
You feel good about that?
Yeah, I do. Got people on the edge of their seats there. Yeah, it's Luke Altmaier's a starter. There's no surprise there. They're not going to announce it. He'll probably announce it. Let's see here. Last week of August, you think?
I'm scared to click with my mouse.
I would think in maybe a week and a half.
I would think we usually talk to Brett Bielema on Saturdays. He had mentioned 2 weeks. So I would think August 19th would be a day that potentially, if for him to announce, he might mess with us because he's pretty in tune to a lot of things and drop this. I could also see him doing Saturday at Media Day, to be honest with you.
It could. Yeah.
But I would say one of the next 2 Saturdays would be a circle this date type of deal.
Yeah, but I mean, we've barely seen the quarterbacks. We saw them a little bit in the spring. They really like Donovan Leary. But you saw today in practice, John Paddock was repping with Josh McCray. He's a top 2 running back, of course. So I mean, we saw Leary get a ton of backup reps, including and some first team reps during the spring. I know they really like Donovan Leary. But John Paddock wouldn't be surprised if he won the backup job. But it's just a really intriguing thing. I think Paddock would make sense, especially with the schedule that you have, Joey, that you really might not have a game where you could put Donovan Leary in for a couple series, because I don't think Toledo, I wouldn't project a blowout. Maybe they do, and that'd be great, and you can get Donovan Leary in there. But just to have somebody with experience behind Luke Altmaier, that's why they brought John Paddock in. And you know he can probably manage a game. Like, you're not throwing Donovan Leary into the fire without ever, kind of getting warmed up first.
Yeah, I mentioned this last time. I still think there might be a difference between backup. Like, if Luke Altmaier were to get hurt in the middle of a game, close game, you probably put John Paddock out there because he's been in those situations. Would John Paddock then start if this were a multi-week thing? Would he start the following week with the week to build Donovan Leary into that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think it's a very close race right there between those two. And you're right. They like Donovan Leary a lot. They've been really, really vocal about how much he's developed over the course of the last year. I know you wrote about it, Jeremy, but he's this team quarterback looking at Sidney Brown, Quan Martin, Devin Witherspoon, Kendall Smith, the defensive front. So like that helps you. That helps you grow. And we shouldn't overlook the fact that his brother, Devin Leary, you don't think there's phone calls between those two guys, like trying to just talk? Like
just been around it. You just like, if you're the first one that ever went to college, like you're the first one in your family ever to do it, like you don't know what to expect. You don't know who to talk to about those things. Well, if you're a younger brother like me, you know some of those things. You know, like just what you have to do in those situations. So yeah, I mean, he's been watching his brother play college football at a high level, and then he gets to ask him about it or talk to him about it or be around all of that stuff. Like, there's so much value in that.
There is. And his development seems very real, which is exactly what you would think over a year's worth of time. I'm really interested with him, what that looks like moving forward. What it looks like this year. I mean, we'll see. It's 6 practices in. Will that depth chart change at all in the middle of next week? Right. I mean, I think they want practices under their belt before they start changing depth charts. We'll see. I mean, it does feel like a very real competition for that backup spot.
Yeah, and they haven't. I remember the first series of the scrimmage that we saw in the spring. He struggled the first series, and they settled in. While John Paddock didn't like blow you away, but he was just in control. Like, he was just like, nothing looked too big for him. Donovan Leary struggled a little bit early on, and that's to be expected. Yeah, we haven't seen a scrimmage. We haven't really seen him throw all that much this training camp, but it does seem like that's going to be an intriguing battle. Your turn, Joey.
Well, you got to do it. Malik Elzy. There's real buzz. Now, we've always, on this podcast, in our conversations and how we write, you want to make sure you're not setting Aurelius Ben freshman year expectations for Malik Elzy. But Illinois is not doing a lot. Coaches, players aren't doing a lot to pump the brakes in the sense of qualifiers when they talk about him. which I think is notable. I don't think that means expect him to lead the league, lead the team in receiving, but
Even though
I think
Malik does. Malik thinks that, right? Like, but that's the comment.
It's what makes him tick, right? It's what makes you go, and as well as being very physically gifted. And seeing him in person, he's a large individual. What Barry Lunny say? He's large. Large, big guy.
6'2", 210 pounds. That is legit. Like 210 pounds is legit. He looks taller than 6'2", by the way. But George McDonald, I asked him, Malik has high expectations for himself. Like, how do you channel that? How do you develop that? And he gave me a great answer. Here's part of it. He's a really good player and he has a lot of confidence. What I try to tell him is that you have to go through the same process everyone else is. You can't jump steps. That's what we talked about today. And that's where a young guy like him, they think they're going to just come in and be the guy right away. Some guys do it, but I just try to teach him and tell him, hey, you're going to have rough days. That's what's supposed to happen because you're a freshman. I try to temper his expectations, but not dampen them. And Malik's going to play. Like that was, I wrote this down. Malik Elzy will play. But you're right. Like Regis Ben, he was superior talent to Malik Elzy, just athletically, I think a little bit. But Malik has the potential to be like a Regis Ben, I think eventually. But that Illinois wide receiver room, like this one has Pat Bryant. This one has Casey Washington, who's, a proven veteran. Malik's more talented, but also has Isaiah Williams. So like they don't need Malik Elzy to be the number one wide receiver right away, which I think is a good thing. But Malik will play. Like I think he's got a lot of similarities physically to me, and probably could make a similar impact as a freshman to Malik Turner, who had 25 catches as a true freshman. That's a really good freshman year if that were to be the case. But man, he's really talented. And you're right. They haven't gone out of their way to say, guys, hey, slow the train on Malik Elzy. Like the players, like Isaiah Williams, the way he talks about him, the way other guys have talked about him, like, yeah, this guy's going to be good.
Yeah, Casey Washington said, I think it's fair to say he's a freak. And like he talked about the look in his eye and that exactly that same driving factor that you had talked about that George McDonald is trying to not change, but maybe perfect a little bit to use that in the right ways. But we've seen it, dude, right? Like we've seen freshmen come in and they have a star ranking and everybody asks, right? And everyone says, what? And then there's always kind of the praise, but listen answer. And I just don't feel like we're getting a lot of but listen here, which indicates, and like, yes, you mentioned all the receivers they have, and they don't need Malik Elzy to be this or that, but you do wonder what's behind those top three, which is another reason I think we're looking at the roster, the wide receiver room, and seeing a player, seeing him in person, knowing his talent, thinking, well, there is room. And Barry Lunny and George McDonald have been, I guess, open or have mentioned, like, yeah, we need 5, 6, 7 guys.
And there's no doubt he's in that 5 for me.
No doubt. So the math doesn't add up without him.
Yeah.
So I think that factors in. But I've been a little hesitant with, because I do think the qualifiers of, hey, not every freshman year for a wide receiver is X, Y, or Z. I love your Malik Turner comparison. I know we collectively talked about that the other day, and like, that makes sense.
If Pat Bryant were on this team, I think Malik Elzy would start. Like, because he's big, physical, he can run block, he can do those things.
That's a big one that he can do, right? Like George likes blockers, and the fact that Malik is willing to block, I think that's a big deal.
He's a very physical player. He likes doing those things. He was a really good defender as well. So yeah, he's going to play. He's not skinny. A lot of these guys come in skinny. So like, even a Sean Miller who's progressed during camp, like that guy need to add strength. Like Malik, yeah, you got to add some strength. You got to get in the weight room and all those things, but he had that. Like he's physically gifted in that way. Like Alex Kapka-Jones, long and lanky. Ashton Hollins, who's having a strong year in the offseason, is long and lanky and fast, but Malik Elzy is big, physical, athletic, fast, like all those things. So he's going to contribute. My turn, correct? Along those lines, you just look at this team. Illinois is getting so much longer and bigger. Offensive line, there's a bunch of 320 pounders on that offensive line. Defensive line, several guys that can play nose tackle, right? Like Illinois was struggling to find those guys earlier. And then defensive back, like nowhere else is it changed more than how long and lanky these defensive backs are. Like Devin Witherspoon, hell of a player. Sidney Brown, hell of a player. You don't have to be 6'2" or 6'3". Illinois likes those guys, and they're getting much longer. Like Sabor Kareem is a legit 6'3". Tyson Rook's a legit 6'3". Elijah McCantos is 6 foot. He looks small out there with all those corners. Zachary Toby is 6'2" and a really built 180 pounds. Caleb Patterson is really long. Demetrius Hill just looks the part of a Big Ten safety that's, that long, lanky, but physically built guy. Like Matthew Bailey is that way too, right? So they're just getting longer and stronger. And Brett Bielema says, I don't think we've gotten worse with speed. So that's what you'd be concerned about, is speed and quickness. Do you lose that with getting longer and bigger? But he said maybe we haven't lost that speed. So we'll see how that plays out. But it's just a noticeably bigger, longer, and of course running back I got to throw into that mix as well with how big they are at that position.
Yeah, I want to bring up offensive line along the way, because defensive backs 100%, dude. It jumps out immediately. But I asked Julian Pearl. I said, what do you think about the guys? Julian Pearl, not a small man himself. What do you think about that? He said, it's been a lot of differences in the guys that we've brought in. I feel like we look more like a Big Ten team for sure, bigger and more polished. A lot of that comes with us putting the season together and getting some wins under our belt. Great recruiting efforts by the staff. Stuff like that makes it easier for guys who are highly sought after to come in here and play for us. Looks more like a Big Ten team, is circle that, because they do.
Yeah. So I'm just pointing this out. I don't think they would recruit Josh Kurtz as a prep guy. I don't think they would recruit a 6'2", not very long armed guy. Now they like what Josh brings otherwise, but Hunter Whitenack is massive. Desmond Schuster hasn't played yet, but he's massive. TJ McMillan's 6'3" for a center, right? And really up to 290 something. Brandon Henderson doesn't look like a true freshman. Zach Amlin, monster. Mountis Moeller is really, really big. Joey Oakley's wide. Clayton Leonard's added a lot of strength. The offensive line, no surprise for Brett Bielema. They like their big dudes.
Yeah, man, it looks just physically different out there at training camp. The small amounts that we're, except for big leg David Alano, he does not look.
Can I go with that? That was another one of mine. You mentioned David Alano. David Alano is good. That was one of my training camp takeaways. Yeah. We get to watch a lot of kicking. And Caleb Griffin looked like he had a veteran day off today. By the way, great behind the back catches. He's an athlete.
He is really athletic. I forget that they were in the, oh my goodness, we don't have a lot of wide receivers also any. So please put Caleb Griffin in that room mode in 2021. He's a really good athlete.
And he punt returned. Really.
Future athletic director.
Important games, yeah. I think he might be a coach, but he would be a great high school athletic director. Maybe he'll shoot higher than that. But David Alano, small guy. What's he, 150 pounds soaking wet? Huge leg. The velocity the ball comes off. I mean, he gets good air under it too, so it's not like it's a line drive, but boy, that kid's got real good leg strength. And from what we've seen, the accuracy's been really good. So I still expect Caleb Griffin to be the guy this year, but that kicking situation for the short term and long term is really good. I think David Alano is going to be really, really good.
Yeah, I'm with you. I wish we had seen more punting, because I know the natural question that someone would have listening is, well, what about Declan Dooley? We just haven't seen a lot of punting, to be honest with you.
In the spring we did. I thought Hugh looked great in the spring, which would build off a really good end of the year. And he seems way more confident now. Declan Dooley had a good leg, certainly. Hugh Robertson was better than him, which he's 30 years old compared to 18. But I think Declan Dooley's got the strong leg. So, but Hugh ended the spring well. We haven't seen much of. We get to see kicking more often and returning more often than the punts. But Hugh has been strong in the times we've seen him since last season.
Yeah, I guess we're kind of running out of position groups here, aren't we? I have one more, because, and it's not quite I still wonder about tight end. We know Tip Ryman the talk has been working on his pass catching ability, and I think we know him to be a hard enough worker to buy in the effort he's put into over the off season. I think Griffin Moore, he changed his number to 81. And he looks more like was he 43 last season? That's a weird number for a tight end. I think he looks physically good. You see him, maybe see 8 and almost 7. You almost see a little Daniel Barker at quick glance. Beyond those two, I don't know, man. Like Nathan Gwynn is skinny. Owen Anderson is, and he should be. He's a freshman. Owen Anderson is still skinny-ish for what you would think of a tight end. Tanner Arkin, we haven't seen a ton of.
Tanner's built more like an H-back.
He sure is.
Yeah, built more. The key here is Henry Boyer. And he was out today for practice. We saw him practicing earlier in the week, so I don't think it's anything serious. And he was all dressed and everything. But Henry Boyer is a key there because he's huge. 6'7", 270 pounds, really physical, good blocker. He's replacing Luke Ford. That's what you need. Somebody to replace Luke Ford. You need Sip Ryman to get better. You need Griffin Moore to be what Michael Marquez was last year, maybe a little bit better if he can be. But Marquez was a nice piece for them. 9 catches, like 140 yards last year. So you need Henry Boyer to be what Luke Ford was last year, which, I mean, Luke was a solid blocker, left you wanting in the passing game, but you just need a rotational guy. And I think it's Boyer and Arkin at those two positions.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not if I had to pick a position offensively outside of just not knowing what Luke Altmaier is going to bring that you wonder about, it's probably tight end for me.
All right, I got one more for the defensive line. Terrence Jameson could not say enough about Ced McConnell. Like he thinks he said today, he said the biggest jump in the offseason of anyone among his defensive linemen, and it's needed. They need depth there. Like Jamal Woods was on the Colts for a while, right? He didn't stick on that roster, but that guy played 100 snaps last year. You need somebody to replace those 100 snaps and potentially be better. I mean, Jamal, when he came in, was a solid player, but Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, we know how good they are. But I think Ced McConnell is the first off the bench for both those guys. Like Bryce Barnes is going to play in the middle. T-Rod Edwards, Denzel Jackson. Like, can they replace Calvin Avery? I think they can be solid in the middle, and that's what you need from those nose tackle positions. But they need depth for the short term and long term, because what if Newton or Randolph get hurt? That's a huge drop off. Can Ced McConnell be solid, serviceable starter for you if he needs to be? And can he be a good rotational player? And Terrence Jameson seems to be really confident in that. So we talked about it on this podcast before. I think Ced McConnell is as important of a backup outside of quarterback is on this team, because I just don't know if there's another guy like him. Like he's really high on Alex Bray. He's really high on Jeremiah Warren, and what those guys are eventually going to be. They're true freshmen. They're developmental guys. They're not going to play this year. So Ced McConnell is that next guy up, and he's going to be a really important piece for the 2024 line.
Yeah, he's been in that not going to play category. He played the most last year. Was last year's redshirt sophomore year, redshirt freshman? I'm drawing a blank on that. Yeah. So he's been in that position. He knows that like defensive linemen, offensive linemen take time in the Big Ten to be ready. But he showed a little bit in that bowl game. You desperately need him in case something happens. You desperately need him to give a break to your two stars and Keith Randolph and Johnny Newton. And is maybe that bowl game, I wish there was a way, to bring it up to Brett Bielema a little bit, but I do wonder how much of that bowl game, you look at a guy like Ced McConnell, a guy like Griffin Moore, obviously the defensive back, whole operation back there, is a Kickstarter.
Right? Like it's a jump start to the next season. So I think they were like, all right, let's play these guys a little bit and see.
Give them a little confidence. I think I knew you mentioned the Kickstarter, but you give them that confidence Kickstarter to go out there and make some plays, to get some snaps. And it seems like Griffin Moore, Ced McConnell, two guys we're talking about, two guys who flashed at times in the bowl game, are kind of in that category there.
Yeah. A couple other things, like I know freshmen are a big deal here. The guys, I mean, Caden Fagan is really impressive looking. He won't need to play this year, most likely, unless they have a rash of injuries. Kanari Wilcher is going to play. We've talked about that. Speed, they need speed on the offense. And I do think Hank Beatty's going to get a lot of reps, and maybe Isaiah Williams can go to the outside and use his speed a little bit more to stretch the field. We should probably mention Brandon Henderson has been a guy people really, really mention a lot. He's got the potential to be a left tackle following Julian Pearl in 2024. So Brandon Henderson's a guy they're really excited about. Jeremiah Warren and Alex Bray, we've heard really good things about. Brett Bielema mentioned Mason Moragan. JoJo Hayden got a nice shout out from Kanena Odaluga. Sabor Kareem's really impressive looking. So just some of the freshmen that we've heard get brought up multiple times there.
I know you watched the DBs today more than I did. Any freshman DBs that you think should maybe be circled or made note of, whether it be defensively or special teams?
Yeah, I like the corners. Jaheim Clark, Zachary Toby, Subur Kareem. I don't think any of those guys are going to figure in right away. I think Toby has a chance at the 2 deep. Now he's got to beat out Prince Ford and Caleb Patterson, the JUCO guys, like before that, but he's physically impressive. Subur Kareem, I think, is definitely going to play special teams. Like I think he'll play right away. Maybe Hunter Whitenack played last year and didn't redshirt. He just played special teams, but I think Subur is going to play a pretty big role early in his career, and maybe they want to get him ready for that. So those guys will all play special teams, that's for sure. Jaheim Clark isn't as tall as those other guys, but he's really long. He is skinnier than those guys, but Toby and Kareem are more physically ready than them. But that's a good group. That's a talented group. I just don't know if I'm going to set the expectation yet that they're going to play a huge role. We talked to Antonio Finellis on Thursday, and I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do want to mention the other guy I want to mention. I know we talked about him briefly. Is Clayton Bush. I think he could be a guy in that dime package. Brett Bielema has brought him up a few times, going back to media day. Maybe that is, as you mentioned, the in case of emergency option for when or if at all Matthew Bailey's injury, if that were to linger on. But he's a guy that's come up. Brett Bielema leads the charge on a lot of those transfer guys. And he led the charge on Clayton Bush. So I just think it's a name to be aware of, especially as you figure someone has got to step into that dime safety role, assuming one, Matthew Bailey's healthy and starting at strong safety, or if he were to miss some time there.
And we haven't mentioned running back much. That's Reggie Love and Josh McCray. Both on the Doak Walker Award watch list today, by the way. I think Bielema probably petitioned him there, and they probably didn't want to.
They probably saw his tweet, and they're like, "Nah, dude, just add him."
He's going to add us if we don't put this guy on there like Isaiah Williams for Blitnikoff, which I agree. Isaiah Williams should have been on that list because almost every good returning receiver is. But I think they're going to split the carries, so nothing new there.
No, just who's the third? Same question we've had. Is it Jordan Anderson who is limited, who has been limited in the last couple times we've been to practice? Is Aiden Lawfrey? One of those two you would figure in there.
All right, that's all I got. And maybe we'll come back in a week, Joey, and give our new thoughts, if we have any new thoughts, if we actually see any more of practice or if it's just stretching and special teams.
Are you not going to hide in the stadium for the scrimmage on Friday to try to catch some looks?
Well, if I did that, I'll probably never be asked to return. So
only if you get found.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Like,
circling the press box, making sure that's not happening.
I just go for the Diet Coke, to be honest with you. I mean, here's the reality. Like, we kind of joke about it. You couldn't write anything or put anything on your message boards that you saw there, because then everyone would be like, either you've got a really great source who's giving you like a ton of verbatim information, or you are somewhere in there. Like, you can't do it. You cannot do it without blowing your cover. And not like I have thought about it, but I haven't done it. I've got the risk is greater than the reward.
Yeah. The assistants are good to us with, like, when we ask them about all their guys, like, you can learn a lot. And that's why we like doing these coach conversations on the site, because those guys give us a lot of insight when you ask them about all these guys, their progress and the expectations. So keep a lookout on that, because we got to talk with Charlie Boland, Terrence Jameson, Bart Miller. I know you talked with Robbie Disher the other day, Joey. I talked with George McDonald. Like, I know sometimes Q&As, like, we like writing up these flowery stories, but sometimes just getting these Q&As of all their thoughts on all their guys, it's some of the best stuff for training camp, because I think fans can really get to learn about the roster and who's going to make an impact based on those.
Yeah, and it won't be all training camp. I don't think every time we talk to them, we're going to do a Q&A, but especially these early ones as you're trying to sort out who's who and where. I think they're really helpful.
Yeah. All right, Joey Wagner. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate the insight.
Appreciate it, man. See you tomorrow.
Is Jordan Love any good?
Hope so. There was a fight at practice today. There's a joint practice, Packers and Bengals. Chase Brown not involved. Elton Jenkins very much involved.
What was your impression of watching Aaron Rodgers on Hard Knocks?
Heartbreak, pain. I miss him a lot. Hope Jordan Love's good.
Is this the Jets? Aaron Rodgers? Is Aaron Rodgers different in New York? I keep hearing like the Jets players raving about it.
Could be. I don't know. I mean, he is who he is. Look, I don't know, man. He might be. I miss him. I need him to play 65% of snaps, and I also need them to not be very good. I do not think those two things will go hand in hand.
Yeah, Mark Murphy is right there with you of doing that, right? All right, Joey Wagner, thank you. Everybody, thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on YouTube as well, and check out all the VIP information from Illinois football training camp up right now at IlliniInquirer.com. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.